I know from personal experience it can be tough to transition from a student nurse to a professional nurse. I remember when I started my first job in the emergency room, and I sat there twiddling my thumbs because I still had not successfully gotten an IV in and I was about to hit the ground running. Little did I know that there was such a thing as nurse residencies. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about HCA Healthcare's nurse residency program. This program supports newly graduating nursing students at the early stages of their careers. HCA Healthcare's year-long nurse residency program helps first-year nurses transition from the classroom to working in the field with confidence. Plus, nursing residents get access to a range of opportunities to learn from specialists in various areas, such as ER, critical care ICU, and surgical services. And there's a variety of other great benefits. Learn more today at careers.hcahealthcare.com/residency. Again, that's careers.hcahealthcare.com/residency. HCA Healthcare is an equal opportunity employer.
Welcome to the Nurse Leader Network podcast with your host, Chris Racinos. Wherever you're going on your nurse leader journey, we're here to help you get there.
Welcome, everybody, to the Nurse Leader Network. I am your host, Chris Racinos, and today we're going to be talking about something that is a pandemic. I would like to say, or I believe, that it is within our own profession. We have a pandemic going on outside of our profession, but we also have a pandemic going on inside of our profession, and that is that we are hemorrhaging nurses. We are losing nurses. They, are burnt out and they are leaving, and it is costing organizations and patient care hugely. And so today's guest is going to talk to us about burnout, retention, and just really kind of give us some tips on how we can make sure that our nurses are happy where they're at and that we attack this pandemic inside of nursing so that we can continue the amazing care that we do here. So I'd like to introduce my guest. Her name is Noelle Kohles. She is a leader and vitality and retention coach. She's also a former director of nursing. Welcome, Noelle.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Noelle, tell us about your journey. How did you get started in your coaching? What kind of nurse were you in terms of your background? We'd love to learn more about you.
All right, it sounds good. So I started my career in pediatrics. I was a pediatric critical care nurse for many years. And at that time, I was working out in Los Angeles and loved being a nurse, loved being at the bedside, and was also always interested and intrigued by the nursing leadership aspect. And when I was looking at leadership, I wasn't thinking at that time as a new grad, looking at nurse managers or directors, but looking at the preceptors and the charge nurses and, being surrounded by great leaders that were, leaders at the bedside. I was like, wow, I really want to be like them one day. And, so throughout my nursing career, I was so excited as a new grad to then move on to the next step to precept and then move on to the next step to be a charge nurse. Because I always felt that inside me, I wanted to give back to the nursing profession, all of the sort of golden nuggets that were given to me, because nurses, as we all know, are the future, and new grad nurses will always be the future. And how you raise your nurses is ultimately how the culture and the outcomes are going to be of the units that you're in. So over the course of the years, my whole nursing career did stay in pediatrics. I did climb the leadership ladder, and I became a nursing director. And I was also a nurse manager. And then my last several years, I was a nursing director. And again, my focus, even into my senior leadership role, was to really look at the staff to see what can we do to keep those that are here happy and those coming in welcomed into the environment that they were in. And so while many throughout the organization, we focus on CLABSIs and infection and all of those things that encompass the leadership role, my focus clearly was on that. But when I looked at my specific units, and I had about 65, 70 nurses underneath me throughout the years, I looked at my staff and I said, we're in a great place right now. What can we do and how can we keep them? And, I feel like in any position, you trip and fall a few times. Not everything all, comes cookie cutter and great. And I found that my greatest successes were learning from my failures. And there definitely was a lot of, failures along the way. But I think that when you do a lot of self-reflection, you learn from that. And what got me into where I'm at today in my career, being a leadership retention and a vitality coach, is that the last couple of years, the role of nursing leaders became very overwhelming in that, the healthcare system, patients have been getting sicker. Then you add COVID on top of it. I mean, that's the sickest of the sick. And our roles just kept expanding and expanding. And as we know, you sort of lose the quality of the work that you can put into it by being so lean. And a lot of that, I lost focus on trying to take care of the staff and do what was necessary as a leader because there were so many other factors that were coming into play. Most recently, October of 2019, I was in an accident where I had a severe leg break and ended up with a rod, screw, or plate, and 7 screws in my legs. I was not able to walk for 13 weeks. And by the time I really learned how to walk again on my leg, I was the typical nurse that we are. And I was like, I'm fine. Everything's great. Put me back in. There's this thing called COVID going around and I need to help my team. So that's what I did. I went back into work a little bit earlier than I should have. That was really hard as well, because, when you're so busy as a nursing leader, and then I'm a mother of 4 with, 4 kids under the age of 12, when your whole world stops as a nurse and you've got home health in your house and you've got people doing things for you, your mindset changes a little bit differently and not for the better. And going back into work with an already, sort of injured mindset wasn't easy for me. You still put on that coat of armor, and I did everything that I thought I needed to do necessary to build up my team as we started to come into the COVID surge. Part of that was creating or taking our pediatric ICU and turning it into an adult COVID ICU within a matter of a week's time. So there was a lot of great things that took place with the staff. I've never had such a resilient, amazing group of nurses who were pediatric nurses for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, only doing pediatrics, then taking care of 60, 70-year-old very sick adults with COVID, and did it extraordinarily well. So I was very, very blessed to have such an awesome team. But overall, the role as a leader was 24/7, as we all know, but the hours of operation increased. There were, you try to look to the other leaders around you for support and help through such a crisis, and that they're going through the same thing. So you try not to burden other leaders in that aspect. And by doing so and not reaching out, over time, you end up mentally weakening as yourself. And by the time May came, I was already showing signs of PTSD and stress, anxiety that I chose to ignore. It wasn't until that I ended up collapsing on a Zoom call at work and shutting the camera off that I thought I was having a heart attack. And even then, I shut the camera off because I didn't want anybody to know what was happening. Because as leaders, we wear this coat of armor as if we're not human. And I ended up going to the emergency room and was there for about 9 hours, finding out that it's not cardiac related. I suffered a severe panic attack. That was sort of the defining moment for me in my career, that I realized that if you don't take care of yourself, similar to the oxygen on the plane, you can't take care of others. And those moments came very fast, where over time, my staff realized and saw that I was not the person that I used to be. And I had to think about what was more important for them and for myself. And that was me taking a step back from my position. They needed a leader that was in the right place that can lead for them. And I needed to be okay with that. It was time for me to heal and pivot my career into a different direction, but taking some time off to self-reflect. So that was my leadership journey over the last 15 to 20 years that gave me the ability to pause over the summer to reflect where I am at right now.
Your story just hits me right in the gut because it's one that I think so many nurse leaders can relate to, right? I mean, we are all putting on this coat of armor. We're all really not doing a great job of taking care of ourselves. And it shows, right? It shows to the staff. So I want to just say, I totally empathize with what it is that you went through. And I can see how sharing this story really, there's going to be people that are listening to this right now that are like, oh my gosh, that's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm going through. And don't realize that actually, moving into a different position is not going to only heal themselves, but really be the best decision for their staff. And so it's a really brave thing that you did, Noelle. I love the story. And I mean, it's amazing.
Thank
so
you.
Talk to me about the work that you're now in terms of being a coach is really around turnover. What are some of the costs to turnover? So for those listeners that maybe don't have really a great understanding of what the costs are, can you share with us some of the costs of turnover to the organization, to patient care?
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you brought up this question because when you're outside of leadership, it doesn't impact you as much when you don't hear the dollars and cents and the numbers behind it. But the cost of turnover, per nurse, each nurse that resigns from their position, it costs roughly between $45,000 and $50,000 a nurse just to resign and leave their position. Overall, it costs the organizations about $4 to $6 million a year. And the hard factor too is when you look at that, that's just the cost of them leaving. Then you look at the average fill time for a position. The average fill time nationwide has been about 81 days. So when you look at that and you take a situation like now that we're in with the pandemic and losing nurses in about 81 days to fill, you realize that, you're in a crisis and you need to fill these spots right away with traveler nurses. That comes at an additional cost because now most organizations are getting gouged with certain, networks that are charging so much per hour to have these nurses come in. And that's another additional cost that gets tacked onto the organization. So it's very costly for turnover and not have the ability to retain your staff.
For somebody who was like $50,000, what is that? Where's that money coming from? How's that figure formulated? What goes into that $50,000?
So when you look at the average cost of what a nurse makes times the amount of time that they're gone, and then you add the amount of money that it actually costs to bring somebody into the organization to reorient and train, that's where the combination of these figures come about.
Yeah. Also, you got to think about, right? So we're paying for an orientation. So how much is the staff that are doing the orientation for this person? We're paying for,
Correct.
Maybe the drug test or the background test or whatever kind of, a primary sourcing of licenses and all of those kind of things. So yeah, definitely huge cost. I teach a finance class for nurses, and I always have them do some work around, budgeting and FTEs and looking at the cost of turnover. And they're always like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that it was so expensive. Right. I think, what they don't understand is that there's also other implications, right, in terms of cost. When you don't have that nurse there for 81 days, who's picking up that work, right? So it's all these other nurses that are going to be picking it up that are now burning out, that are now having patient harm because, there's not enough nurses or because they're burned out and not being able to take care of the patients, or, you're short-staffed and can't turn your patients. So now we have all kinds of, hospital-acquired pressure injuries. And I think there's huge costs. There's costs around satisfaction, right? How satisfied are the patients going to be if there's constantly different nurses, if they're constantly on a new learning curve, or if, there's constantly short-staffed and I can't get my water or get up to go to the restroom when I need to. So definitely a huge ton of costs. In terms of patient outcomes and nursing retention, is there any kind of relationship there?
There is. And, it's so funny. It's like you're reading my mind because as you were saying that, I was thinking this because there is a direct correlation between retention and patient outcomes. And this is actually one of the areas, and, we can probably touch on, later on in the show, but I did my leadership course, did turn into me creating a program for nursing leaders that's designed for nursing leaders to improve their growth and development and skills as a leader and give them the methods to retain staff. And one of that, we actually discuss retention and patient outcomes in one of the weeks in my course. And there was a qualitative study that was done not too long ago where they took 1,000 frontline nurses to identify what the focus was when you're looking at the front lines. And when you look at patient outcomes, there is a direct correlation between leader member exchange, and I'll talk about what I mean by that, staff satisfaction to patient satisfaction to improving outcomes. What this study did show is that when you show empathy and trust and you have that relationship building with your staff as a leader, your average length of stay, patient stay goes down, patient falls, medication errors went down, and patient satisfaction went up. And it was pretty impressive to see this. And what I discuss, in part of my course is that when we talk about this, I came up with the terminology leader member or leader staff exchange. And what I mean by that is when you're looking at trying to create a healing environment and a positive environment for your staff to work in, you've got to think about those times as a leader when you walk into your unit. And I'll give you an example of walking into a PICU because it's oftentimes is chaotic when you're a level 1 trauma hospital. And you know that you're busy with back-to-back meetings. You know that you don't have the time to sit there and be with staff, or maybe you have a minute to go through. The staff are going to know that, sense it, and feel it. My suggestion is don't go in, don't bother. Because if you can't be in the moment and be present to be there for your staff, it actually interrupts, that exchange can interrupt their energy and their thought before going into a patient room. So for example, let's say you walk into the unit, it's really busy, and Sally has a patient who's decompensating from a respiratory standpoint. And in the next room, she has an admission of a patient who is septic, multi-organ failure, needs to crash on ECMO, right? These are two situations that actually can legitimately happen. And you see the stress on Sally's face and you say, Sally, I see that you're really frustrated. Now, is there anything I can do to help you? In Sally's head, she's going to be like, yeah, no, I don't need her help, but okay. And she's going to answer that. And she's going to say, no, I got it. I'm busy, and move on. If you tell Sally that you recognize the stress, let me do this for you, you're actually directing yourself to a specific task that you may be able to help her with. Sally still may say no, but the thought is that you came in with an intention to give value to that staff member. If you came in and Sally was overwhelmed and came to you and you weren't there for her and you walked away, the energy and the stress on her going into that next patient's room with the admission is going to present itself in patient care. And this is what a lot of leaders and staff don't realize, because it may sound silly to some in the moment, but you have to think about, and I use an example of like with animals. Animals have a sixth sense. They know when fear is there. They know when something is going wrong. An employee knows when you walk into an environment, you can feel it and you're like, ooh, this is either busy, stressful, chaotic, or, you feel tension. It's the leader's responsibility in those moments when you see staff like that to reset the button and correct it. And if you don't have that moment to have that exchange, you're better off not going in. So that's that piece of when you look at retention and patient outcomes that affects staff, that's so pivotal and vital for the leaders to be present in those moments to correct.
Wow, those are really great points. What would a nurse leader, what would you tell a nurse leader to do if, let's say, for example, they are to pick you, but I'm going to make it up. Maybe the nurse leader hasn't, done a whole lot of patient care recently. So maybe it's like a chief nursing officer that hasn't done a lot of patient care. If they're walking in there and, they feel that it's stressful and, they're not they walk in and they want to help, but they don't know what they can do to help. What kind of thing might they offer to do to help the staff feel supported?
I think the best thing you can do as a nursing leader is be transparent and be authentic. If you know that you have not been at the bedside and you cannot go in there and, actually clinically help with patient care, you go right to the charge nurse and say, I'm here to help you. Here's where my strengths are. By asking a charge nurse who's busy, I want to help you. What can I do for you? They are already in a tailspin. They are not going to think about what you can and can't do because they don't know what you can and can't do. But if you go in with intentions to say what your strengths are and what you're able to do, then they'll delegate that task to you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know when we first got hit with COVID and the hospital decided to have no patients, right? It was, I think, a thing that most hospitals decided to have no visitors. We had several, probably, I don't even know how many visitors that we had in the hospital. And so I knew, because we were setting up, like COVID units and all of that, that the staff were ridiculously stressed out. And so myself and my director of nursing went into every single room in the hospital. We were a 300-bed hospital, every single room in that hospital, and had those conversations with the patients' family members about having to leave because we were going to close it down to patients' family members because, we didn't want to put that on our front line. We knew that they were already busy and stressed, and I could not, I could don and doff, like I know how to don and doff, but there's definitely, I've been working as an NP a lot longer than I worked as a med surg nurse. And so there was a lot of things I didn't know how to do, but I could have those conversations that I knew were going to be intense and heated, right? A lot of family members were like, I'm not leaving. And so, you hit the nail on the head, and I got to give kudos to my director of nursing because she was a rock star. I mean, she really had a great attitude and really kind of, joked around with family and friends and had a great approach to it versus thinking of it as a chore. So, I think, you've definitely hit the nail on the head. So you said that you have a program. Tell me about what your program's called, where, what kind of things you offer in it, and what some tips are for nurses around it.
So I'm actually like a little kid at Christmas time. I'm really, really excited about this program. And it's amazing because when I had that time to self-reflect and look at everything that I've done and accomplished and failed at and succeeded, there was a very small moment in time that I had as I started to reflect and look back, and I said, my God, there's so much that we're trying to do for bedside nurses, and there's so much being put on leaders to do and to figure out that many leaders have been put into positions that they haven't been trained in, they're not ready for. And it's unfortunate that sometimes it becomes to their professional demise that it doesn't work out, and leadership ends up leaving the bedside or, leaving leadership just as equally as fast as bedside nurses are, because the ability to handle such a crucial position is difficult. So when I looked at my role as a leader through, in my succession planning throughout time, and I looked at where the areas of opportunity were to grow and looked at where nursing leaders are today, I realized that there's not enough training out there for nursing leaders to develop that forward-thinking approach, to have that strength, that vitality and skill set in them to be that strong leader, to be able to be supportive to their staff. So I created a program, and I tried to make it unique in that there's a lot of nursing retention workshops and programs out there. But when I looked at this from a leadership perspective, I actually focused on the new grad retention piece of it. So, just to give everyone a little back history of me, over the years, I've actually had a very high percentage rate in nursing retention, which was around 90% overall for many years. And prior to me stepping down from my role, the 4 years prior to that, I had 4 consecutive years in a row of 100% retention rate with new graduate nurses. And that was something.
That's awesome. Let me just give you a quick clap for that one.
Thank you. For me, it was just something that I did. And I'm not a researcher. I wasn't into studies and things like that. And my brain was in a totally different mindset and direction. And when the education department and those that created the nursing residency program started looking at stats and saw that my units were always the highest, the questions always came up, what are you doing? And I had to take a pause. I'm like, I don't know. I'm just doing what I know what to do. And I realized perhaps by the end of that year, I'm like, this probably isn't a good answer. And I really need to take a deep dive into what are we doing differently? And I don't want to say what I was doing because it wasn't just me. It was my team. What were we doing differently as a team that caused these new grads to stay? And so I took that approach. I looked at it and analyzed it from a leadership perspective. And I realized when I peeled back the layers that there's 4 key dimensions to leadership that inevitably allows you to retain nurses. And I put the retention in a bubble, and those 4 key dimensions that I end up talking about in my program is emotional intelligence, individualism, influence, and consistency. So I'll go into that in a second. So this is a 13-week program designed specifically for nursing leaders to teach them at their core how to be a leader and how to retain nurses, but specifically new grad nurses. And it's 1 hour a week, so it's 13 weeks. But at the end of the program, they'll walk away with a certification of completion. But the main thing is this isn't just a program to learn and teach and say, yay, I completed it, and you move on. We're actually taking the core metrics of each organization to look at what your percentage turnover rate is. What does retention rate look like? Take the NDNQI, the HCAP. There's certain factors within the NDNQI and HCAP surveys that we focus on to look at those numbers, and you use these metrics as a benchmark. So by the end, we've created, within the cohorts that go through, an implementation plan that's designed for them to go back and present this sort of like a graduation in the 13th week to their executive leaders to say, here's what I've learned, here's what we've come up with, here's with our numbers. And in the next 6 months to a year, we're going to reduce our turnover rate by this percent. And here's how we're going to do it. So there's a plan put in place after this. And that's the piece that I love about it, is that they're actually going to see and create change that's happening within their organization.
Wow. Okay. So tell me some more about those 4 key dimensions.
Okay. So and I call it the leader's playbook. So the 4 key dimensions that I found to be very successful as a leader is emotional intelligence, influence, individualism, and consistency, like I mentioned. So when I look at emotional intelligence, I look at the fact that, how you handle your own emotions will ultimately impact how you can handle others. I think about the phrase, what is it about me that's causing this person to react this way? Or what is it about this situation that I'm unable to fix? So you have to take that step back, and we talk about this, and we do a lot of role playing of emotional intelligence to look at that piece of it. And that helps you take a pause, not become a part of the situation, but help the team to create the solution. When you look at influence, it's to me, it's sort of very simple. It's what is it about you that people love? Ask them. What is it about you that where you've seen the most change, and can you replicate that into your staff? The influence and the power, your self-love and the influence that you project out there is ultimately going to change the mindset of your staff. Individualism, I hold this one very near and dear to my heart too. This is separating person from persons and separating your title as a leader from self. This is a very key, I kind of consider this like if you're looking at the human body almost as the heart of the body, like that vital organ that keeps it pumping and going, because oftentimes we look at our units, you always want to focus on a team, but within that team are a bunch of nurses who are growing, professionally growing in a different speed, a different rate, and through different generations. And if you don't get to know your staff on a personal level and what their professional growth trajectory is, you're likely to lose them in the shuffle. And this is where they start looking in other directions. When I say take your title away from self, this is where, these are the times that when I'm having conversations with staff, just to really build a relationship, I flip the badge around, because right now I'm a human, I'm a person, and I want to get to know you. And in the end, yes, that's going to help me as a leader figure out how we can get you on the correct path. As a person. Part of that too, I also, developed when I was a nurse manager. a 6-month check-in. So every nurse has their annual review. It's, for leaders that are listening, it's like the nightmare every year that we go through, especially if you have very large teams. Like I had, it was 65 nurses. You have to do annual reviews. You've got to do those performance reviews for each and individual nurse. I created a 6-month one-on-one review for staff. It wasn't mandatory. It was optional, but at the 6-month mark, it allowed us to review where they were the year before. Look at their goals. Have they met their goals? Are they trajecting in the direction that they want? If not, why? This gives you the leader as the opportunity to talk to them about retention. What's going to keep them to stay? If they're not meeting their goals halfway through, sometimes it might be a red flag and you need to dive into that. Are they having personal issues at home? Is there something you can do? Or are they having a change of heart? This way, when their year mark comes up, it's not a surprise at where you're going when you're doing their evaluation for you and for the nurse. So that's the piece that I love when we look at these 4 key dimensions and I think about individualism. And, I'll tell you, it wasn't easy and it was like a full-time job, but out of all 65 of my nurses, I knew every single one of them personally, every single one of them. And doing their leadership and staff evaluations became a lot smoother for me, because when you start to get to know your staff, you know what their needs are, you know where they're at, and you know what to do next. The 4th key is consistency. So I've been saying this for many years, and I've learned this from one of my great leaders. Consistency hardwires practice. I cannot emphasize that anymore within so many aspects of nursing as a whole. But as a leader, the balance and the expected outcomes that you want to achieve, if you are consistent with your approach each and every time, regardless of whether it's a crisis happening or you have a low census, will ultimately equal a highly reliable leader and a team. If you enter that room every time the same way, there's an expectation on staff that know how their leader is going to respond to a situation. So that is the 4 key dimensions that I talk about in my program. And, we dive into that a little bit more in that week, but I think those 4 key dimensions are really something to focus on as leaders to succeed in retention as well.
Oh my gosh, you totally just gave us so much valuable information. I was writing down some questions as you were talking, because there was just so much great information. One of the questions I have is, so you talked about your 6-month check-in and your evaluations. That's something that I frequently hear from nursing leaders that they just don't have time to do. Do you have any tips around how you manage to, fit that in? What did it look like? Or how can we get the listeners to really be able to take this and put it into practice, especially knowing that everybody's short on time?
Yes. And awesome question. So when you look at your calendar, and often we all know what our calendars look like every day in a leadership position, you've got to take some time to block out for yourself. So I mean protected time, whether that's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, at some point in your day, you can literally find time to block out at least 15 minutes, whether that means coming in, early in the morning. I've also found myself, and this was a perfect example with my group of directors, that we were all going to the same exact meetings all the time, getting the same information. And all of our plates were very overwhelmed, that we talked to our executive director and said, hey, can we divide to conquer? This way, when you look at time management, it helped us all, especially during the time of evaluations, get things done, because we all don't need to be in the same room at the same time to hear the same message to know what to do afterwards. So we divide to conquer, and those that went to certain meetings reported back to us on what the information was. And if there was any deliverables we needed to do, we wrote them down and followed through with them. So those are two things that I think helped me. And I was always able to get my evaluations in on time. And I think that's because so in the beginning, I was like, I think as a new leader, I was like crying over this. I was like, I can't do this. This is going to be like the bane of my existence. This is impossible. How do you go through this whole thing? And I was like, there has got to be a way. So of course it took me 4 to 5 years to figure it out. But when you look at it, if you do things in short clips, because hopefully not all organizations, but at least in the ones that I worked with, when evaluation time was coming, they open up the link for you to fill out the evaluations. And it's usually about 2 months ahead of time. So what I did was I took the number of staff that I had, right? I divided that by the number of days, and I looked at how often, like how long it was going to take to do it. So there was like math that I literally put involved into this. And then what I did was I actually took the employees that I knew were going to be the most difficult to do, and I actually did them first and not last. And because I knew I could also be a very big procrastinator. And when you procrastinate the inevitable and those evaluations that you need to focus on that need as much attention to detail, you don't want to put that last, because these might be the employees that might not be sticking around. And as we know, as leaders, documentation and process is really important. And at some point, you don't know when you might have to go back and reflect in these evaluations. So I would actually put them first. So by the time I was done with that, it was like biking down the hill afterwards. And I set aside a few employees either each day, or you just have to average it out by the time the deadline comes.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great strategy. I think, one thing that I like to teach my nurse leaders too is the priority matrix. So for those of you who don't know what that is, basically you draw a little square and then you divide the square up into 4 boxes. So it looks like 4 square. And on the top, the horizontal axis, you're going to write urgency. And then on the vertical axis, you'll write the importance, and you decide which ones are high and which is low. So on the top axis where it says urgency, you'll have over in that left-hand corner high, over in the right-hand corner low. And then on the vertical axis with importance, you'll have the bottom square low and then the upper square high. And you want to look at, is this important with a high urgency? So if it's like, the hospital is having a fire, that's important and there's an urgency, you do it right now. Like you drop whatever it is you're doing, you do it right now. If it's a low urgency, but, high importance, then you can schedule it. So for example, what you're talking about right now is something that is definitely high importance, but the urgency is not right this minute, right? So we can get that scheduled. And then if you look at your urgency and it's low and the importance is, the urgency is high and the importance is low, like, somebody else has an urgent deadline, then that's something that you either want to push back on or you can delegate it. And then the last column is something that has low urgency and low importance, and that you just don't do. So an example of that might be like refiling, last year's files into like a new file folder. Like you just don't do it. We only have so much time in the day. And so I've used that priority matrix to really examine like even my meetings, right? So if I have meetings that are scheduled all day and I have something that's really urgent come up, I look to see what's the lowest priority on there. And then I ask myself later on, does it really need to even come back on? Is it something that I can take off and then not go back to? So I think those are some great points around prioritization and making sure you fit in those things that are important, especially evaluations when it comes to, getting to know your staff and just knowing the huge impact that it has on retention and satisfaction of your staff.
Yeah, I forgot about that tool. That's a great tool to use.
Yeah, it's awesome. Oh man, well, you have so much great information around really how to get these nursing leaders to, improve their retention, you talked about how this works really great with new grads. Do you think these strategies also work with maybe, our folks that have been around for decades on the unit?
Absolutely.
Is there anything that you would do different between the two groups?
The only thing that I would do different, and I also actually focus on this in my program, is look at generational nursing. It's really important to, not all new grads are, millennials or Gen Zs. People come into the careers as a second and third career. But I think when you look at nurses on a whole that are nurses, beyond the novice nurse years, you have to look at, and when I say generational nursing, I mean by years of experience. And that's what you need to take into consideration. All of these methods that I teach as a leader will go into any group of nurses, whether they're newer nurses or not. But the key factor is taking into consideration the years of experience they are as a nurse, because the group that tends to be forgotten about are those that are between like that 2 to 5 year mark, of nurses at the bedside. We really have to do a great job at focusing on that group, because that's the point where they're going to either want to grow professionally within the organization if they're given, the support to get there, or they're going to leave. And the nurses that have been there for a really long time, when you look at retention, most of them, are not going to leave, but you have to value their tenure of being there for a long time, and use their knowledge and experience to invest into how you can create better outcomes in a culture in the unit. I think it's great to bring them back into the cultivating change in the unit. It gives them sort of that sense of, seniority where, they matter.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I've seen several things happen when you don't do that. So number one, you end up with that are really just dissatisfied in the job that they have. They just stay because they've been there for a long time. Or two, they just don't feel valued, right? They have so much experience to offer. So to be able to like reinvigorate that group of nurses and really just have them spread all of that wealth and experience that they have to some of the folks that don't have the number of experience that, years of experience. I think that's a really great point around, making sure you're not just focusing on one group. And I think you really made another great point around the 2 to 5 year mark. That's true. That's exactly when people tend to look for new jobs, either because they want to promote or because they're not satisfied. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And then, when you look at this group that are older too, and, this is where, the old saying of nurses eat their young come into play. When you don't value the experience of the nurses that have been there for a long time and include them in on decision-making, their attitude and behavior is what affects the nurses coming in. They're not going to appreciate them as much as they should if you don't appreciate them as senior leaders. So it's almost like a snowball effect. So when you show value in your senior leaders, your senior nurses, and how much value they bring to the staff coming in, they're going to feel really valued and appreciated. And they're going to want to literally show their legacy before they leave and give back to those younger nurses, who, what they were. It's like raising your young.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's going to be crucially important, and especially in terms of having baby boomers retire and just losing that huge gap of, we're going to have a huge gap in terms of experienced nurses on the floor in terms of nurses retiring versus new nurses entering the profession. So super salient points.
Agreed.
So Noelle, if folks want to find out more about you and your program, where can they look?
So I think the best place to look is on LinkedIn. So if they just find me on LinkedIn, Noelle Kohles, you can see a lot of the work that I've done. I also have my own LinkedIn live show as well. That's on Wednesdays at noon, East Coast time. I always have to remember to include that coast, that time zone in there. I would love to have people come and participate. And a lot of the topics that we do talk about has to do around healthcare and nursing. And, my calendar's open after March. And if anyone has any great ideas or topics to bring up, I'd be more than willing to have them on my show and to, talk about healthcare, nursing at a whole. And, I also focus on a lot of nurse entrepreneurs too, because it's amazing how many of us are out there right now. And the best thing we can do is raise each other up and support each other. So if you are a nurse entrepreneur and you've got some great ideas and a great business going, I'd love to talk with you too. And it'd be great to have you on the show.
Yeah, I think, you brought up another wonderful point, and that is, as nurse entrepreneurs, you are a leader, right? So I think a lot of folks believe that, leadership really is like in an organization, maybe that isn't your own, but when you own your own business, it's even more crucial that you have that leadership skills, because you're building your own, your own, and you're oftentimes siloed, right? If you're building your own business, oftentimes you don't have other folks that you can, look up to or lean into. So think it's super important to have a mentor in that way. So wonderful.
Yeah,
Great.
Chris, you brought up such a great point too. And I think that's why we all really need to do a good job at supporting each other on LinkedIn or any other platform, because we are so used to collaborating. And I found this to be the hardest part of being an entrepreneur and building a program. I literally sat there and looked around and was like, crickets. And I said, I'm like, I can't, I'm like, I need feedback. I need brains. I need people. I'm like, what do you mean I can't do this on my own? And then really, literally through building up a network on LinkedIn, I'm like, hey, can you look at this? Can somebody hello?
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Great. Well, it has been amazing to have you on the show. I really appreciate all of the amazing nuggets that you have. And again, if you want to check out Noelle and her work, you can go ahead and go on to LinkedIn, and you'll be able to find Noelle Kohles there. Noelle, do you want to spell your last name for the listeners if they're looking you up? Or actually your first and last names if they're looking you up?
Yeah, sure. So it's Noelle, Noelle, and my last name is Kohles, Kohles.
Awesome. Thanks again.
You're welcome. Thanks so much.